Hi, I'm Tina Miller, author of the book, But God. Today I asked my friend, Pastor John Lara from Water of Life Community Church to speak with us about But God number 4. He's going to talk to us about the promise of Isaac.
Hi, my name is John Lara. I'm one of the associate pastors at Water of Life Community Church in Fontana, California. And I'm here to talk about the book But God from Tina Miller. This is a really cool study. Each of the individual But God statements are taken as great insightful moments. But the thing I love about it is as you read the whole thing, it weaves together a tapestry that reveals the heart of God in a really neat way. And so we're going to be talking about But God number 4 today, and it's in the book of Genesis chapter 17, verse 19. So I'm going to read that right now. But God replied, "No, Sarah your wife will give birth to a son for you. You will name him Isaac, and I will confirm my covenant with him and his descendants as an everlasting covenant." Now, it's very important with any of these but God statements, as I'm sure you learned in school, the word but is a conjunction, and it joins two sentences or clauses, two thoughts, two phrases, and it's very important to look at what's coming before the but. And in this case, it's one of those things where God is trying to clarify something for Abraham. You see, he loves to be clear with his people, he loves to communicate his heart to his people. And so, in this case, Abraham had said something, and God was contradicting him. The but serves as a contradiction between the two thoughts. And God is saying, no, I'm not going to do what you think I'm going to do here. I'm going to do what I said I was going to do. As Tina said in her book, God consistently uses his word to correct our misconceptions. Now, Sarah gets bad press for laughing. If you remember back in chapter 18, she had laughed when God had said that she was going to be a mom in her old age. But Abraham laughed too. Here we see in verse 17, he was worshiping and laughing at the same time. The word says that he was bowing his head, but he was laughing to himself. Have you ever done that? Have you ever been worshiping God with your mouth or speaking God's word with your mouth, but you're harboring doubt in your mind? This is exactly what he was doing, and he seems very duplicitous in this moment. He's saying one thing, and he's thinking another thing. He's not trusting God at all. And this was Abraham. He had a really hard time with faith, which is funny because he's known as the father of faith. That's how he's recorded later on in the book, in the Bible. And so we look at him here. He's expressing doubt, and he expressed doubt a lot. He was doubtful, and he tried to help God out at a number of different occasions. He tried to help God fulfill his destiny by keeping Sarah safe, by lying, keeping himself safe by lying, a couple of different occasions. He didn't believe that God could give him an heir in his old age, and so he took his wife's servant as a concubine and had Ishmael, you'll remember, trying to help God along. God's not powerful enough to do what he said he was going to do, so I have to help him along. And in this situation, he's condescending to God and saying, God, I know you've promised me a son, but you know what, I'll help you out. Why don't you just bless Ishmael? I already have him. You don't have to worry about trying to conjure up another son for me. And this is silly when you think about it, how Abraham's view of God. Now we understand that Abraham had a lot of issues in his life. He had lost a younger brother at one point. He lost his brother Haran. But his faith was very, very small. Now, there are those who would teach that the onus for a miracle, the onus for something happening in your life that's supernatural, is on the person who has the faith. They would say if you have a big enough faith, you can twist God's arm and you can make him give you the possessions you want, make him give you the relationships you want, make him give you the destiny that you want. And you can use your faith to manipulate God. And I'm so thankful that our God is so much bigger than that. You know, theologians use terms for God like omnipotent and sovereign. And that just basically means that God does what he wants to do, and he has the power to accomplish it, no matter how big it is, and no matter how small our faith is. If we have something that we're praying for, it's not that if we can conjure up enough faith, we can get whatever we want. God is so much bigger than that. And with Abraham, he was to discover that even though he had very little faith, God was still able to work gigantic miracles. Isn't that wonderful news? It's not dependent on the size of our faith. And we see that illustrated in the life of Christ with somebody who was desperate for a miracle. There was a man whose son was demon-possessed, and the demon was so aggressive it actually tried to kill him, throw him in the fire, do other things like that. This man was desperate, so desperate that when Jesus was publicly teaching, this man cried out and interrupted Christ in the middle of his teaching and said, "Lord, Lord, have mercy on us." This is what he said. He said, "Have mercy on us and help us if you can." And I love Jesus' response. It just made me laugh out loud. He says, "What do you mean, if I can?" Jesus is looking at this guy saying, "Who do you think I am? What do you mean, if I can?" And the father instantly cried out. He corrects himself in verse 24. This is in Mark chapter 9. He says, "I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief." And I don't know about you, but that totally describes me sometimes. Sometimes I do believe, but I still need God to help me to overcome my unbelief. And this is where Abraham found himself. Abraham was bowing to God, but in his heart he was actually laughing at God's promise. You see, we draw boxes around God's abilities. We say, of course God could create the universe in 6 days, but yet we don't believe that he could solve the problem of our finances. We believe that he could still the storms, Christ, when he was on earth, he could still the storm, yet we don't believe that he can heal our marriage. We do that all the time with him. And the neat thing is that God says, no, you know what, I know you don't believe that I'm going to be able to fulfill my promise to you, but I am, and I will. And it doesn't matter how small your faith is, I can still do it. God used moments like these to build Abraham's faith throughout his life, to the point where Abraham, by the time he really needed to exercise faith, he was able to, and it was strong enough. And we see that as the Bible eulogizes him, in Hebrews chapter 11, we find that Abraham, by the time the end of his life had come, he was a giant of the faith. In Hebrews 11, it says this about Abraham. "It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son Isaac, even though God had told him, 'Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted.' Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead." You see, Abraham believed that no matter what happened to his son, his faith was so big, he believed God could bring him back, even if it meant bringing him back from the dead. This is good news for us today. Whether you find yourself in a place where you have very little faith, or maybe you have giant faith, we know that God's fulfilling his promises isn't dependent on the size of our faith. He will accomplish his purposes either way. And even if you're in a place where you feel like you don't believe at all, and you don't think he can do what he says he's going to do, God doesn't mind proving you wrong. Thank you so much for listening today, and God bless you as you continue to study his word.